Welcome back. And I'm sorry, but this is a very boring lesson today. This lesson is all about forces. It's not very long, but it's not very exciting either. A force, by definition, is nothing more than a push or a pull. That's all it is. I have two wagons here. The first wagon, I have a force represented by this red arrow that is pushing this wagon. The second wagon, I have a force represented by this red arrow that's pulling the wagon. Now, a couple of important things to remember here, other than the definition. The first thing you want to remember is that forces can be represented by arrows, like this red arrow, and you can draw the arrows to scale. The bigger the arrow, the bigger the force. Smaller the arrow, the smaller the force. The other thing that you should remember is that the force will always represent the direction of motion of the object. So the wagon's going to move to the right because the force is acting to the right, and that's important to remember. If you ever have to identify the direction of a force, look for the direction of motion. Down here in the second wagon, this force again is acting to the right, so the motion is also going to be to the right. It's that simple. So before we go on, forces are a push or a pull. They can be represented by an arrow drawn to scale. Bigger the arrow, bigger the force. Smaller the arrow, smaller the force. And the force, the direction of the force, will show you the direction of the motion, and vice versa. Another way to explain this is that a force is any interaction that, if unopposed, will change the motion of an object. Now, this means something actually pretty profound, something that you definitely want to remember. If an interaction, that means that push or pull, if that push or pull causes an object to move through a distance, that means that our definition of force is that a force is an interaction, a push or a pull, that will do work on an object. That is important to remember. That really is a great definition for force. A force will do work on an object. It's a push or a pull that will do work on an object. In this case, it'll cause the wagon to move to the right. In this case, that's a can. It'll cause this can to slide across the shelf to the right. In this case, it'll cause this can to be crushed. But in all cases, work is being done. So, a force is any interaction that's a push or a pull that will do work on an object. There are actually a couple of kinds of forces that you should remember. One type of force is a contact force. And a contact force is just that. It's a force that's applied by coming in contact with something. So for instance, this force, represented by this red arrow, is coming in contact with this wagon. It's actually touching it. This force, represented by this red arrow, is actually touching that can. This force, represented by this red arrow, is touching the can right here and crushing it. So contact forces are forces that occur when the object applying the force touches another object, in this case the wagon or the can. But that's not always the case. Some forces are what are referred to as non-contact forces. And a non-contact force happens when the object applying the force is doing so from some distance away from another object. Great example for this is this electron that's going to move from left to right along this wire. And when that electron moves along the wire, it generates an electromagnetic field that extends outward from the wire. And that electromagnetic field can apply a force to some other object some distance away from the wire. Nothing is touching it. It can either attract it or repel it, depending on which direction the electron is moving. And so, since there's a vast distance, nothing is coming in contact with this object over here. It's referred to as a non-contact force. Another good example is a planet, perhaps the Earth. And you can see a satellite around this planet. The satellite's in orbit, so you know there must be a force of gravity, a mutual attraction between both the Earth and the satellite. And that force of gravity acts as though it's touching the satellite, but it's not. It's actually being applied from some distance far away from the satellite. And it attracts both the Earth and the satellite mutually. But since they're not touching, it's not a contact force. So the force of gravity is a non-contact force. Well, that's what you should understand at this point about forces. Nothing difficult. But just keep in mind that forces can be non-contact forces or contact forces. The direction of the force will show you the direction of the motion. And the most important thing to remember was our final definition, and that is that a force can do work on an object. Thanks for watching.